Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. Mike and Natalie, exercise fight. Princess Television says, I'm trying to think of what I would do in Mike's place if I had a partner who didn't want me present in their time of need, because Natalie didn't want him to be present at the surgery. I would imagine that they didn't see me as a reliable person and they didn't trust me to take care of them. It would bother me that I did something that caused them to see me that way. Right. The point that Princess Television is making is that Mike was really focused on his feelings rather than being alarmed of, oh my goodness, my wife thinks of me as someone that would be an aggravating element in her surgery. I should probably address that, but he didn't. Jovi and Yara video. A lot of comments on this one regarding the criticism from the family, from Jovi's family to Yara sleeping with the newborn child. Ebeth says, so glad you commented on this one. We had both of my kids in our bed when they were babies and had no problem moving them to their own beds around the age of 2 years old. They were excited to move to their own beds. They're now 19 and 21 and both living their own lives. Thank you for correcting the record. Yeah. For whatever reason, we have this, part of the history of child rearing and parenting goes back a long time, obviously, but a lot of our ideas of what is good in parenting comes from what I think to be the aristocrats of the Victorian age in England and the East Coast, where you had rich people who, everyone would look up to them and think that they were doing everything great. And the practice that they would do is they would have their children, but the other people would take care of the kids. The royal family has this problem too, where the kids aren't attached to the parents, and there's this series of nannies or governesses or whatever that kind of come in and out of the child's life, and that's disruptive to their attachment, and the child has nobody. And there was also this attitude of children should be seen and not heard, and if they annoy you, then you put them in the other room. And so that translated into when the child is crying at the age of 3 months, because you're trying to sleep at night, you put them so far away that you don't have to hear them. Because we didn't understand attachment, we didn't understand anything regarding development, and it was just more convenient. It's more, and eventually the child will stop crying, but at what cost usually? So we have this still in 2021, a lot of people with this idea that from day one, you have to push back against children and their efforts to glom onto you. Children come out of the womb and all they want to do is be around you. They want, for the most part, particularly in the first few years. And we have this backward notion that creates too much dependence. But it's the opposite, as I said in the video, that when you entertain and satiate a child's dependent needs, they actually have the resources to become independent. Children don't want to glom onto you. When they're glomming onto you, they're feeling afraid or they're feeling lonely. I'm going to sneeze, I think. Yes, I sneezed. I paused it, so so he didn't have to be subjected to me. When I sneeze, I really go for it. Some people, they go, like I figure it's a natural response, and so I let her rip, and that's what happened. Anyway, I forget what I was talking about. Samantha says, you can't hold your baby too much is the best advice I've heard as a parent. Bed sharing just freaks me out due to SIDS and suffocation risks, but I know there are safe ways to bed share too. All parents and babies are different and have different needs. Yeah, that's a really good point. 2 points. One is that all parents and babies are different. And two is that when you do bed share, you do have to take some precautions regarding SIDS and suffocation risks for sure. Unfortunately, that can happen. And but you follow a few basics and you can lower the risk significantly. But the other point is very good, is that parents and babies are different. As I always say, there are a lot of ways to raise a happy person, to raise a happy child. And sometimes that involves a lot of bed sharing, and sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the kid a lot of times, and it depends. There's a lot of ways to engineer your life. Anyway, Iris says, this is so frustrating to watch. It feels like everyone, including Jovi, is ganging up against Yara and criticizing her parenting. Sometimes people should just keep their opinions to themselves. Or they should do some research regarding their opinions so that they don't just say their opinions as if, it'd be one thing if Jovi and the mom were saying things like, well, in my opinion, or in my experience, or I don't know the research, but here's what I think. If you say it tentatively, that's fine. But when you say it with authority as if your random idea, it's just one of those things that kind of drives me a little batty, is that a lot of people think of themselves as parenting experts, and they are. They probably learned how to parent well based on the children that they had and the culture that they were in. And, they probably most parents do a pretty good job. And yeah, they're an expert in that one anecdote, that one example, or the 3 children they raised. They have 3 examples of how to, they think about those experiences. They're like, oh, I think I did pretty well. Okay, but that doesn't apply to the other billions of children on the planet. So it's one of those things where everyone's walking, or a lot of people are walking around feeling like they know everything when they know some things. And as a professional who would go into homes and would help parents parent their children at varying ages, going, from 4 to 24, I can tell you that parenting is very complicated. There's a lot of things that you need to consider. There's the personality of the child. There's the personality of the parents. There's the circumstance. There's the age. There's a circumstance. Does the parent work a lot? Does the parent not? Can the parent afford a nanny? Can they not? How does the child respond? That's really the key. Is you can't just apply like a checklist style of parenting to children, because not every child is the same. And so you do your best as a parent, and you try to get enough, data or tips along the way, and you try to have an approach to your kid, and then you watch what it does once the kid is experiencing your parenting style, including sleeping with them in the bed. For some children, sleeping with them in the bed until they're 2 can actually create dependency issues and issues where they have a hard time being away from you because they don't know what it's like to be away from you. Whereas other kids, which I find most of the time, like what Ebeth was saying, is that it probably fostered closeness and attachment and safety and relaxation so that the children felt safe enough to launch themselves off into the world and come back and launch themselves off. So anyway, Caitlin says, thank you for reassuring me that sleeping with my daughter wasn't as devastating as people pretend it to be. My child is very independent and easily plays on her own. Right. Nancy says, I lied to everyone that my baby slept in her crib just to avoid this kind of conversation. I got scolded a lot in the hospital for having my newborn in bed with me instead of the hospital bassinet. What? What, Nancy? The hospital, which, the hospital and the staff thereof are a part of the culture and thus will absorb the nonsense. But you would just think that they would understand. But anyway, your newborn child, a day old, they were scolding you for sleeping with the newborn instead of putting the child in the bassinet. Wow. Unless there was some kind of health problem, I'm guessing that wasn't the issue. Otherwise, you would have mentioned that, Nancy. But yeah, we have some very broken aspects of our culture, and this is one of them. And reading all the comments on this video reminded me of how bad it is. I live in a pocket of like-minded individuals, or at least flexible individuals, and I forget that outside of my pocket, the dominant idea and theory of parenting is you have to constantly be pushing your child away from you so that they don't become dependent. But of course, and I talked about this in the video, when you do that too much, and the child doesn't react well to that, you either create a child that turns off to dependency, and we call this avoidant attachment. This person has to, this is like a Mike and Natalie. That's what you create. Or you create someone that is too dependent, who is so scared of abandonment because they felt this constant pushing of you're constantly pushing the child away, and so the child gets desperate and will cling to you because they're afraid you're going to push them away. Whereas when you allow the child to feel safe and secure and heard and understood and regulated, then they have motivation to leave. Children don't want to stay by your side. They like you, but they don't want to be around you all the time. They want to be off playing. They want to be adventuring. They want to be doing new things. They want to be jumping off of this and that. They want to play with kids. That's what they want to do. But they need you as a secure base. And this is what John Bowlby theorized. And now this is the main theory of attachment. Or this is he developed the theory of attachment, and this is my main theory. I said that weird. But anyway, listen to my whole deep dive on attachment theory. But anyway, Goddess of Wine says, Dr. Honda, can you discuss a little bit about the cry it out method when putting kids to sleep? There seems to be this debate on whether it should be practiced, and if so, how do you do it and from what age? My mother-in-law and sister-in-law are always arguing about this issue. My mother-in-law reasons that children at that age should feel comforted and secure when they are crying or under distress. Yeah, so this is such a what do you call it, a quagmire. The cry it out method, so let's get away from the terminology. Like I said, kids are different, and there are a lot of different ways to raise a child. What I'll tell you, generally speaking, is not going to be helpful is the extreme cry it out method, which was, I think, the dominant way of parenting kids, 40, 50 years ago, which was pretty much right off the bat, newborns, maybe, a month in, you put the child in another room in a crib at night, because there's always this problem of children who, newborns will sleep sporadically because that's the way their brain is working. And it's really hard on the parents because they can't sleep at night. It's, they are constantly being woken up to feed or to comfort. And it can be very disruptive. And since we live in a capitalistic society where people, especially in the past, would have to return to work right away, there was this desire to get the kid to sleep throughout the night, quick. And one way you can do it is essentially torturing your child and putting him in another room, and the kid will cry, and they cry it out, and eventually they stop crying, and then they kind of will sleep through the night, maybe, or they'll just be quiet through the night because they've given up. And the people will say, "Oh, that's a success. Look, they're in their room from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. and they're quiet for the most part. And, yay, we succeeded." Did you? Or did you actually prove to the child that crying doesn't do any good, so why cry, It can actually be incredibly traumatic. But for some kids, it's not. That's the thing. It's like, for some kids, month one, you can put them in a crib and they will sleep and they'll wake up and they'll just entertain themselves, and maybe they'll cry a little bit and you'll go in there and you'll comfort, and they're just really easy. They're just some kids are extremely mellow and things go okay for them. The key is there's no method of parenting that you're supposed to follow other than be attuned to your child. Attunement. Because some kids are very fussy, and so you have to attend to that. Some kids are super mellow, and you might actually have to do a little bit to draw out them so that they can express themselves, because they might be kind of non-expressive for one reason or another. But the key is attunement. So let's say that you have this method of having your kid go to preschool. The kid is 4 years old, and you're trying to get the kid to go to preschool. And so people say, oh, well, there's this method. You just drop off the kid, and you drive away, and no matter how much they cry and scream, you just drive away. Okay. So with some kids, that will work, but with other kids, it won't. So the key is, as a parent, you have to you have to just pay attention, and most parents do, and they can basically read the child's mind based on their response. And if the child is freaking out, meaning they are afraid, they're in high distress, then you must attend to it. If they're just kind of playing a game like, well, I don't want to, and they're just being fussy and they're being manipulative, and you can usually tell the difference, then maybe there's a little bit of a different response. If they're mellow about it and they're like, yay, preschool, let's go, then you know, okay, well, they seem good. So there's not a set rule. So cry it out method, when we're trying to sleep train, there's not like this method that you just foist on every single child. You have to gauge what it's like. And children also develop differently at different ages. That's the other thing people talk. Okay, at this age, you're supposed to do that. For all humans on the planet, I don't think so. So the key is, and when I tell parents this idea, they celebrate it because most parents know how to do this, and they love to do it. They love to be attuned to their child. They want to, they can't help but pay attention to their child and attend to their child when, they're happy or when they're sad or when they're scared. They want to be there for their children. And that will carry the day. So when it comes to sleep training, usually parents, but not all, I will say that there are a set of parents where the child, like, what's his face? What was their name? Tariq, he slept with his 7-year-old autistic, 7-year-old? Something like that, autistic daughter. She still slept in the bed with him. That's totally fine. It can be inconvenient. It can be a sleep disruption, but it's okay. There's nothing pathological about it. There's nothing damaging about that too. You can sleep in the same bed with your entire family, your entire life. It's fine. But us Americans, we sexualize everything, and our minds are constantly in the gutter, and we can't wrap our mind. Everything has to be separate. No one can touch. Now, I'm not saying you're supposed to sleep with your kid until they're 7 and beyond, but you can, is the thing. And the kid will be, the key is are you attuned? And is that okay with your life, So anyway, you're parenting, so you're trying to sleep train the child, and you're trying to have them in their own room eventually, because you don't want them in your room. You don't want them in your bed all the time, just for various reasons of, you just want to be able to sleep on your own, or you want, parent intimacy time or whatever. So you start taking steps in that direction. You have to, you have in your mind the goal you want to get to. You want them to sleep throughout the night in their own crib. Maybe it's in the room with you, or it's another room. And you slowly work your way to that, and all the while you're gauging how the child is responding to it. You don't just push the kid into the deep end and say, well, they'll learn to swim. No. You start in, ankle deep water, and you see how they respond. Maybe that's another, sort of a metaphor. There's another task as parents. You're trying to help them to be able to swim because you live near a lake and you want to swim. You don't just take a 2-year-old, throw them in the deep end. You start in the shallower area, and they get used to that, and they have the floaties on and age appropriate. And you say, okay, let's go out into the little bit further out, up to here, and the kid's like, I don't like it. And you're like, okay, so you bring it back in, and then you're with them along the way. You're attuned. You're like, okay, that was too fast. I'm with you. I'll save you. It's the same with sleep training. It's a little different because you're dealing with a pre-verbal child that might not be able to tell you or be soothed by your words. But anyway, that is my point. This debate that people get into about the cry it out method or all that other stuff, I find to be almost like a political debate. You cannot reason with people along these lines. It's like this religion or something that people either want, they're on one side or the other. And parenting is much more complicated than that, and I wish that we had a intelligent discourse about this issue, because frankly, children and parents are suffering. Parents are suffering because they feel like they're always failing. You have a kid who is still sleeping in someone up, up above. Who was it? Who was that? Nancy said that she had to lie to people about her kid sleeping in her bed with her infant, because she felt the stigma. I mean, she was a closeted parent because of our stupid culture. and the culture is unscientific. The culture doesn't understand the science. And this person who's doing probably the right thing or the average thing, parents left to their own devices probably would sleep with their children in the bed or near the bed, or at least kind of really close, probably for the first couple years of life. Maybe not that long, maybe longer. But the fact that we have parents who have to closet themselves when they're doing the natural thing that most parents, I'm not saying you have to do that, but I'm just saying it's probably what, I'm guessing if we rewind the clock 50,000 years, that's what was happening. It's the natural way of raising a child. Bonobos don't take a newborn and put the newborn in another tree at night. So, yeah. And then the Jovi and Yara video kind of triggered that whole thing. Okay. Tiffany and Ronald. Let's go on to them. This was when Ronald was being sexist. Isabella says, I'm from South Africa and Ronald is Afrikaans. Afrikaans? Some of them are extremely sexist and some of them dote on their wives. It's actually quite strange, the differences. Interesting. Hoop says, I feel like gender roles is another one of those conversations you're going to want to have before you get married. Agreed, Hoop. Kim says, this is not a South African thing. This is a Ronald thing. So they are from South Africa and they're telling me, no, this is, we're not all like that. Not all South Africans. All right, Elizabeth and Andre, babysitter fight. Dominique says, wow, I feel so bad for Andre in this scene. It's such a horrible feeling when someone lies to you like this. Then you have a whole gang of aggressive people talking down to you. This is just awful. Yeah, agreed. Miss Mish says, so I asked for a nickname for Rebecca and Jen. Miss Mish says, a good nickname for the sisters, the Karens. Gray says, the sisters can be called Squick and Squawk. Seb says, they should be called the Sisters of the Apocalypse. I kind of like that. The Sisters of the Apocalypse. Krithika says, the sisters should be called Gorgons, LOL. They are more toxic than Medusa. I like that one as a Dungeons & Dragons player. Political Troll says, the sisters should be nicknamed the Sand Snakes after the Game of Thrones characters. Well, now that one I take issue with because the Sand Snakes were cool. I like the Sand Snakes. Thabil says, we should call them the Terrible Two because they're so childish. I kind of like that, the Terrible Two. That's a good play on words. Please says, the nickname for the sisters should be the Kmartians. I see what you did there. Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't call people names, but I don't know. I feel like they kind of deserve it. I don't know. Angela and Michael, this is the psychic video. Letitia says, I don't get the point. She's inviting Michael to talk about their problem, and then she's not willing to listen to him. Yeah. Jashelle says, how do you keep a straight face so long during this psychic reading? Is that part of your training? I would never want to play poker against you, Dr. Honda. Yeah. So I'll say three things to this, actually. One is that I actually have always had resting blank face, I guess. When I was young, there's this infamous story where my mom is lining up all of us kids and saying, doing a picture, and my mom saying, okay, Kirk, smile. And I'm like, my mom says, Kirk, smile. And my mom says, Kirk, you're not smiling. And I'm like, I'm smiling on the inside. So that was this big joke in my family that I said that. Another, just along those lines, I had brain freeze when I was like 3, and I was like, oh, I hurt my feelings. Anyway, then I had another moment when I was like 2 or 3 when I wanted a doctor to turn my eyes inside out so I could see inside my body. I thought my body was hollow. Anyway, so While we're on the topic, I'll tell another story that gets knocked around in my family. I went through a phase where I thought I was Oscar the Grouch. I was, pretending I'm Oscar the Grouch. I must have been, 2 years old or something. And my older brother said, as a way of pranking me, he said, well, Oscar the Grouch eats ice cream and pickles together. So if you're Oscar the Grouch, then you're going to have to eat ice cream and pickles. And I was so in the zone, I was so method acting that I said, yeah, let's do it. And I ate, and we went home and I ate pickles and ice cream, and it was actually pretty good. It doesn't sound like it would be good, but that tang of the pickle with the vanilla ice cream, it's actually pretty good. Anyway, maybe I'll have that later. So my point is that when I'm watching the show, sometimes I notice when I'm editing the videos that I have that resting blank face, because I think it's just how I listen, I guess. I tend not to be very expressive with, and I actually learned, so as a therapist, and so you ask about my training, one, it is part of a therapist training to try to not be so, like, a common way that people react sometimes when they're talking with a friend would be to roll their eyes or to go like, ugh, and it's important that you learn how to control your reaction to your client, because if you just react normally, you could hurt their feelings. A client might say, yeah, so I got back together with my boyfriend, and if you're like, ugh, that could really harm the relationship and is not very therapeutic. And even though on the inside you might be going, ugh, you might not want to show that because you don't want that to be the dominant, because for some clients that could really trigger them. So on one hand, we want to know what our facial expressions are doing. And so I have spent a lot of time myself and training others how to know that about themselves. It doesn't mean you need to be blank, though. That's you can if you as a therapist feel like that's the way you want to do it, but you don't have to be that way. You can certainly be very expressive with your face. And so anyway, yeah, when I am watching the videos, I notice sometimes that on the inside I'm actually having a lot of reaction, but my face isn't when I'm just watching. When I'm talking, I tend to be expressive with my hands and my face and stuff, but when I'm just watching, I tend to just be having blank face, even though on the inside I'm having a reaction. Anyway. But then you also say, you would never want to play poker against me. And I actually, I don't know if you listen to my audio podcast, but, Bob and I have been playing cards for a long time. There was a good chunk of years where that's all we did together was play poker. And yeah, I got pretty good at bluffing. So maybe that's all part of the thing. But the other part is that I, a long time ago, learned not to judge people. And so part of my reactivity is reflective of that. I think a lot of people, when they watch this show, a judgmental feeling comes over them and it expresses in their face. But I actually don't have that because of my values and my work with my clients. I tend to, when I see, and I think I've always been this way even before I was a therapist, I think I tend to just look at people. Where I think it comes from is that I'm half Japanese, half white, and I grew up in a dominantly white community, and I would see people judging me or other people of color, and I always would take a step back and I would think, why are they saying those things? What's going on here? And so I started to wonder, do I have those things? They're saying a bunch of ridiculous things about Asians, about me, or about black people. And do I have those things? And it made me question from an early age, everyone, including my own reactivity and my own assumptions about what's happening. And so I think I've always been skeptical of my own reaction. And so I think that blunts a lot of my reactivity. So when I'm watching a TV show like this, that might provoke a lot of this and that sort of reactivity from the viewer. I have this natural propensity to just reserve judgment and think, okay, let's see what's going on here. What am I seeing? I feel maybe I should react this way, but is that actually fair? And so I think that all that equates to just being blank. Ashley says, I'm convinced Angela just hired her friend to be the psychic and to gang up on Michael. And her friend said, I have just the outfit. And then she threw on an old Halloween costume. Yeah, I mean, what was that outfit supposed to be? I think she was from the UK, the psychic. Was that, what was that? Camille says, that's okay, Dr. Honda. It's impossible to watch an Angela video without being sarcastic and rolling your eyes. Right. So I had a rare moment where I actually was rolling my eyes and being sarcastic, which is uncool. And I shouldn't do that. But Camille was saying it's okay. Thank you for that. Devin and Jihoon. Twinkle Toes, good old Twinkle Toes, says, I have a slightly different take on Jihoon's style. I have someone in my life who devolves into a similar mode of I'm a horrible person every time we need to have a serious conversation, and I'm starting to think it's a way to avoid any kind of serious discussions about their negative behavior. I hate it. How do you even discuss anything with those kinds of people? Okay, so I don't know, Twinkle Toes, your partner, but I have treated a lot of people with this kind of behavior, and off the top of my head, I can think of two general categories that have a fair amount of overlap. So with Jihoon's, I'm a terrible person, I'm so sorry, I'm lazy, I'm a loser. I think for some people that exhibit that, they 100% genuinely believe that about themselves and are really falling into a pit of self-hatred that is always there, but they're sometimes able to kind of avoid it by just avoiding anything that'll ask the question as to whether or not they're a loser. And that's one of the things that people with defectiveness schemas or failure schemas will do is they'll just avoid anything that involves any chance of failure. Meanwhile, they're failing in life because they're just playing video games all day. Because in video games, failure, it's hard to fail in a video game because especially the way they make video games today is when you die, you just get pushed back a little bit and you can just start over again. You don't have to start over from the beginning. Like in the old days when I first got my NES, they didn't have save games. And so with Super Mario, you had to play through the entire game all at once. And if you died, if you lost your lives, you had to start all the way at the very beginning. Anyway, so I think for some people with Jihoon's presentation, it's genuine. I think for another group of people, it's half genuine and half played up. So on one hand, they do have a pit of despair that they fall into, but they will amp it up histrionically as a way of trying to get other people to say, no, you're not a failure. So for you, Twinkle Toes, you're experiencing that. You have someone in your life that does that, and it bothers you, and it's hard to discuss anything with them. Yes, it is. It's hard to discuss anything with. Now, I wonder about Jihoon because no one ever helps him in those situations. They just sort of look at him. Devin just kind of looks at him and is like, you are a loser. Instead of saying, honey, you're not a loser. I just wish you would have done these things differently. And that's kind of why their pathologies fit so well together, because Devin will come down hard on him, which fits with his schema of he deserves that. Anyway, and I think Devin is actually projecting part of herself into him and attacking. I don't think I've talked about that. It's just a hypothesis. But anyway, so for you, as you're trying to interact with them, it can be very frustrating. Well, probably if you went to couples therapy and they could analyze the way the two of you are interacting, you're both participating in part of the problem. So I don't know what's happening, but even in the second category of those who are sort of amping it up histrionically to gain some sort of, they're fishing for you to say, no, you're fine. Even for them, it's important to recognize that they're suffering and to just see them as purely manipulative, and talking to them that way actually makes them feel worse and actually makes them feel more need to say, hey, be nice to me. And the only way they know how to do that based on their early childhood is to be pathetic, if that makes any sense. I don't know if that's the case for you, but I've never seen a case where someone exhibited Jihoon's behavior and didn't have at least a good dose of those kinds of schemas that are really hard for them to deal with. It's not common, the common interpretation of behavior that bothers us is that the other person is doing it on purpose when they almost never are. Anytime that your partner is annoying you, it is almost certain that they are trying their best and they're hurting or they're afraid or something's going on. But almost all the time, particularly when things get bad, when you're fighting with your spouse, there's this narrative, there's this interpretation that my spouse is doing this on purpose. They're not listening to my feelings on purpose. They're not paying attention to me on purpose. They don't care about, they're blowing me off. They're abandoning me on purpose. It's almost never on purpose. It's almost always some kind of trauma that's being triggered. Anyway. So I talked about bidets. Connie says, I'm Italian, so bidets were part of my cleaning routine from early childhood. I have friends in the Czech Republic, and they see bidets as something extremely weird. So it's definitely not an American thing. Interesting. Naomi says, I never thought it was disgusting, just more confused on how to use a bidet. Well, Naomi, there's videos on the internet. Whatever I Want says, to answer the bidet question, at first it would be a huge shock from the cold water and strong stream, and I got used to it. But I got used to it and don't jump when I use it anymore. Yeah, same. The first time I tried a bidet, like one of the kinds from Japan, like that the thing comes out, it was shocking. When you live many years without any water being, shot in that direction, it is, it's an experience. But eventually you get used to it. Jenny in Summit, Smriti says, this is my time to shine. I'm an Indian woman, and I have been waiting to chime in on Dr. Honda's videos. With respect to American stereotypes, the most common stereotype we have about Americans or Western society is that they don't place emphasis on family values. They do not appreciate family relationships. They are quick to abandon spouses and children and are too individualistic. Indian families expect to be involved in each other's lives, a little too much so. They carry a lot of influence on their families, especially kids, no matter the age. So in my mind, an American is the antithesis of those values. Yeah, absolutely. So there are pros and cons. There are pros and cons to the American individualistic style, which we can imagine what those be, and there are pros and cons to the Indian style, which might be hard. As me, a Seattleite, it might be hard for me to relate to those pros and cons, but I know enough about my own bias to know that if I was raised in India, I would see those benefits for sure. And I think that that's one of the tragedies that this show, 90 Day Fiancé, will alert us to, is when you will marry cross-culturally like that, there can be major value differences that interfere with happiness and the relationship. Big Ed, Anon says, I live on the East Coast and used to eat lunch early in the morning, but ever since I realized Dr. Honda posts on a regular schedule, I eat my lunches at 1 p.m. daily so that I can watch the new episodes. I find that to be delightful that, because it was kind of a random choice. And the podwife, she decided this. She said, okay, well, we'll post it at 10. We'll post episodes at 10 in the morning and noon, I believe. And because we're thinking, well, if you're on the East Coast, it's like 1 and 3. I don't know. And so now we have at least one person is they're eating lunch at a particular time because of that. Summer says, I had this issue with my ex. So the Big Ed video. I had this issue with my ex. I was fine giving him space and time before we discussed our problems, but he would use that distance to just avoid the conversation altogether. So now I have to ask and reassure myself that they are going to return to the conversation. Usually I will say something like, I know you need space before you're ready, but can you give me an idea of how long you will need so I don't bother you in that time? And can you reassure me that we are going to talk about this in the future? That's great. In the moment, remembering to do this is hard, but I feel like it helps. Yes, Summer, very differentiated and very healthy of you to do that. And I like that you provided an example because, I often do that as well. So about this topic is if you have a partner that's like this, that tends to be more on the avoidant side and will want to escape a conflict by disengaging, it's hard to deal with. It's not easy. There's no real easy answer to that. The best case scenario, the person avoiding or leaving will say, honey, I just need about an hour and I'll be right back. But that almost never happens because the avoidant person, they're in such a state that they don't even want to say that. And they might not want to return in those moments. They might want to say, I don't want to ever talk about this again. Avoidant people tend to be that way. And so it's hard. And then from your side, you're amped up, you're in a conflict and they're moving away from you. And now you're more afraid of being abandoned and you have reasons to be upset and you have more conversation that you feel like needs to happen. And so you say something like this. It's like, look, I know you need space, but can you reassure me that you're going to come back? That's a tall order for even you to say that because you're amped up, right? Because you just want to say, you can't leave, right? We got stuff to talk about. You can't do this to me. That's not a way you treat a spouse, And even when the avoidant person comes back, it's not guaranteed that they're going to have the differentiation to be able to have a calm conversation about a tense topic in the relationship. So, do the best you can, but don't expect things to go wonderfully. We all have relational traumas from our past that are being triggered, and sometimes you just have to work around them, anyway. So I'm glad you're differentiated. I'm glad you're finding some success, but don't beat yourself up if it doesn't work all the time. Ashley says, wow, that was triggering. My ex would always block the door out of his room because I wanted space during some arguments and he wouldn't let me out. Can confirm it leads to violence. Right. So this is something that happens is when the avoidant person wants to, or just the person who wants to disengage, sometimes the preoccupied person or the other person will actually block the other person's ability to get out of the room. And this doesn't always lead to violence, but it absolutely can. If you ever have a partner early in a relationship block you from leaving or block you in any sort of a way, that is a strong indication that eventually they are going to emotionally and physically abuse you. So watch for that. If you're in a fight and you're just like, look, I need a break. I'm gonna leave, and they don't let you because they're triggered in that moment, and one, they feel entitled to do that, and two, their attachment injuries are so severe and their only solution is to control, that in all likelihood it's going to get worse. Doesn't always, for sure. I have clients where they've done that and it didn't escalate into violence. Anyway, Prima says, thanks for the video, Dr. Honda. I realize now, after my breakup with my ex last year, that I was definitely the distancer in our two biggest fights. Now I know what to say next time before I leave, if I ever get into that position again. Yeah, good for you, Prima. Yeah, it's good to know, so, I guess, because when you're the distancer, you feel like you're the right person. You're like, well, I was right because that was a crazy conversation and I was just out of there. But you don't realize that you are potentially exhibiting your own avoidant attachment style and passive-aggressively harming the other person. Anyway. Anna says, Big Ed trivia time. Big Ed has a tattoo of his own face on his leg. Yeah, I've seen that before, Anna. You could say it's a tattoo of his logo because it's not really, it's his face, but it's also his brand. So it'd be like if it's akin to if, what's his face? Steve Jobs had an Apple tattoo. Because I think Big Ed's, an entrepreneur, and I think part of his gig is like selling all those stickers and stuff. I wonder if anyone has ever, I'm sure people have, honestly. I'm guessing that he has made a good amount of money off of that merch. Who knows? Anyway, Real Housewives. Seth says, these kinds of shows just go to show you that money doesn't buy happiness. I wish our culture didn't idolize fame and fortune so much. Absolutely. JB says, thank you for pointing out the double standard on women calling other women hormonal. Garcelle would strike if someone said that about her. Yeah, Sutton, she seems to have issues, and I think they come from a legitimate place. I think she's been through a lot, I think, in her life, and I think she's easily triggered. And to call her hormonal, just, it's a sexist thing to say that has been said by many people, including women against other women, mainly men, by the way. But also, I just think that some compassion, Sutton is struggling, and I think that with compassion comes understanding and comes relationship betterment. I feel like I don't have... My puppy is trying to get in my office right now. I can hear her whining. Can you hear her whining? Anyway, let's wrap this up. I'm going to attend to the puppy. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.